Hi, so I want to talk about this problem today, which I find really exciting, which is the minimum CFG problem. So suppose that we have a CFG and we want to know whether or not it's the smallest one that we can possibly have for the particular language. So the question here is, given a CFG, can we check if it is what I call rule minimal, which is there's no CFG with fewer rules for the exact same language, okay? So if the equality problem for CFGs was decidable, then this would be decidable. But the things that we're going to prove today is that this thing is undecidable and recognizable. So we can recognize whether or not a grammar is rule minimal, but we can't decide it. Okay, so let's do the recognizable one first. So what does it mean to be rule minimal? It means that if I have this CFG right here, I can't remove any of the rules. So all of the rules are necessary in some sense. So what does that really mean? So suppose that we have like this CFG right here. So here's a CFG. And let's say that there's some rule A goes to X. And let's suppose for the moment that this thing is minimal. It's the smallest possible grammar for this language in the sense that I can't remove any rules from this thing. Well, then that means that this rule right here obviously can't be removed, because if we did, then we would obviously change the language. So what would we do then? Well, here, this rule must be used by some string somewhere. Some string requires that this rule be here. There's no other choice of rule to, maybe there are other rules that you apply, but eventually this rule will be used for some string in every derivation. So the minimal problem is equivalent to asking for each rule in the grammar, does there exist some string? Let's call it, let's call the rule R, and then some string W's sub R, so the string, for each rule, the string could be different. Does there exist some string that in every derivation of that particular string, it uses R? Okay, that's just an equivalent way of saying what the minimal problem is. And this actually will allow us to formulate a recognizer for this thing. Because if this thing is minimal, then what we can do is start enumerating strings. And if we find a string that will show that every single derivation of that string uses some rule, then we can mark that rule as being necessary for some string. And so therefore that rule cannot possibly be ruled out. So to make it decide a recognizer, so here's a recognizer. So remember that we have exactly one grammar as being provided. So where G is a CFG, of course. And since we only care about a recognizer, I don't care if this thing actually runs forever for a grammar that is not rule minimal. So what we can do then is for all W in sigma star, then what we can check is whether or not, in every single possible derivation, what rules are used in this thing. So for every derivation of W in G, I can't actually convert this thing into Chomsky normal form. I really like to. The reason is that would dramatically increase the number of rules in the thing, and it might be that some rules there are completely useless, whereas here they may be all required. So I would love to convert it to CNF, but it actually wouldn't help anyway. But all right, so for each derivation, what we should do is mark the rules used in this derivation. And then once we go through all derivations, if there are any rules that have not been marked, so if I haven't marked some rules and we have found them to be used in every derivation here, then we will mark them. And what I should say here is that in this step, we will unmark at the end of step 1. So at the end of step 1, once we consider every derivation, I'll unmark the ones that were not helpful for us. So if there were any that have not been maybe permanently marked, I should actually say that, permanently marked, then what we can do is check if any of them have been used in any derivation. So, and any have been used in every derivation, then permanently mark them. Okay, so this is just looking at any rules that are particularly necessary for this specific W string. And I'm going to permanently mark them because if I remove that rule, then it would change the language, because the ones that were used in every derivation, if I removed it, then this string would not be recognized anymore. Okay? And what we can check at the very end of all of this, so C, if we find that every single rule has been marked at this point, we accept. So if every rule has been permanently marked, we will accept, because this grammar has been shown to be rule minimal, I should say. Cool. And so this is just a recognizer. If it is rule minimal, this thing will stop. If it's not rule minimal, we don't care, because it's just a recognizer. All right. So now I want to show that this thing is undecidable. So whenever we deal with context-free grammar undecidable problems, it's usually a good idea to appeal to the post-correspondence problem. So remember that for the post-correspondence problem, we have a set of tiles. So something like this, where we have a top string and a bottom string here. So maybe like BC over A or something, maybe one more. So let's say like A over AB, C. And remember the post-correspondence problem is asking, is there a choice of these tiles? I can have as many of them as I want, such that if I put them all together, the top string read across all of them is equal to the bottom string read across all of them. And that's a problem that is famously undecidable, because we can simulate a Turing machine with them effectively. If and only if it has a solution. So a solution is a choice of tiles, as many of each as you want, such that the top string is equal to the bottom string. If there's no solution, then there's no way to make it so that the top is equal to the bottom. Okay, so what can we do here? So what I want to talk about is a very similar variant to the post-correspondence problem, which is what I call the full post-correspondence problem. So here, in the normal post-correspondence problem, maybe I can say, I'm going to forget about that tile. I'm never, ever going to use it. So just forget about it. Even though it's presented to me, I'm going to forget about it. The full post-correspondence problem is asking, is there a solution that uses every tile? So is there a solution to the tiles that uses every tile at least once. Okay. There's no requirement other than that, as long as they use all of them. So what I want to first prove is that this thing is undecidable. And then we will use it to show that the minimum problem for CFGs is undecidable. So this one's actually pretty straightforward. So we're going to reduce the normal PCP problem. We're going to reduce it to full PCP. So assuming a solver for the full problem, can we solve the original problem? And it's actually pretty straightforward. So what you do is you say, well, if this set of tiles, let's call the tiles, let's say P. So the set of tiles I'm going to call P that we're being provided with. If that thing has a solution, then there is a set of tiles within it that form a solution. So what we can do is we can repeatedly ask the full PCP solver, hey, for this particular subset, do you use every tile in there? Or is there a solution that uses every tile in that subset? And if so, if this thing finds a subset that that has a solution, then that means this thing has a solution. If we query this solver for every possible subset that is non-empty, and this thing reports no, and this thing reports no, none of the subsets used every tile, then that means that this thing does not have a solution. So the idea here is query the full PCP solver, or the supposed one for it, on all non-empty subsets of P. I gotta say non-empty here, because if I have an empty instance, then this, by definition, it has a solution. There's an empty string on top, empty string on bottom, but so it has to be non-empty here. But if any of them say yes, then that means that we have a solution for P, namely that subset. So if any say yes, then we accept. And if none of them said yes, then that means there's no subset of tiles that has a solution, which means that there can't possibly be a solution. So then otherwise, reject. And there are only 2 to the n possible subsets, so it's only a finite number if there are n tiles in this thing. Cool. So this would theoretically give a solver for PCP, but we know PCP is undecidable, so full PCP is undecidable too. Okay, so then now we know that full PCP is undecidable. Now I want to show that min CFG is undecidable. So how in the world are we going to do that? It seems like we have this thing with tiles and this thing with CFGs. It's like, how do they possibly relate to each other? So the idea is, let's try to make a CFG that you can choose which tile to use by having a rule that corresponds to each of the tiles. And if we have to use every single tile, then that means that because we're having the rules and the tiles correspond to each other in some sense, then that would mean that I would have to use every single rule, which means that the grammar is not minimal. So let's make a CFG. So here, remember that we're given as input some CFG that we want to query whether or not it's minimal or not. And the thing is that we want to be able to solve the full PCP problem. So we're going to reduce full PCP. We're going to reduce it to min CFG. So assuming that we have a min CFG solver, then I want to solve the full PCP problem. So how do we actually do that? Well, what we're going to do is that the input to the full PCP problem, remember, is a set of tiles. Let's call it P. And then what I'm going to do then is we're going to convert P into, so this is a conversion, convert into some CFG I'm going to call G. I'm actually going to call it G1 because we're going to make two grammars here and then combine them in a certain way. So what is the CFG here? So the CFG is going to try to combine the tops and bottoms of the tiles. So let's figure out what these tiles are. So let's say that the set P here is a set of tiles. Let's call them UI on the top. And actually I'm going to call them TI and BI. So TI is the top and BI is the bottom of the tile. So let's say that goes from 1 to n. So I have n tiles, let's say. So then what is G1's construction going to be? So here's G1. So it's only going to have one variable here. So it's going to have S1, and it's going to go to $, so that's a terminal, then TI, then S1 again, so S1's in the middle here, then BI, and then BI reversed, and there's a reason for that, and then $, or £. So the only reason of including these $signs is so that we can separate each of the tiles apart. So this is for all 1 from I to n. Okay. So here, what is this actually doing? So suppose that this grammar is minimal, so that there is no way that we can actually make this smaller. So then that would mean that there are some strings that require every single rule. Well, here we have to use this rule no matter what in order to get a string, because this rule over here has a variable in it. And so we can't get a string of terminals just by using the rules over here. So what am I actually doing here? So the net effect of doing this is that we have, let's say, $T1. Maybe T1 doesn't happen to be first. Maybe then T3, and then $, let's say T7 or something. So some choice of T's at the beginning, and then $B7 reversed. I'll say the reason for the reversed in a second. So it's the exact reverse order of the indices that are used. So then B3 reversed, and then B1 reversed, and then $. And located right in the middle is a £, somewhere, because we're recursively going inward because of this variable in the center. Okay, so and one thing that we can notice is that we might as well assume, we're going to assume here that TI is not equal to BI, because if they were the same, then we could just pick that tile, and that would have part of a solution, and it doesn't really help us here. Another thing that we can assume is that TI is not equal to TJ for across the top, although it's not really that necessary. So actually I'm going to drop that requirement. It's not totally necessary. And we can assume this. It's not really that crucial for the proof here, but it helps in proving that this particular grammar is minimal. So I can't make this actually smaller. So if the original P instance required every single tile here in order to have a solution, then this thing would be minimal. The problem is that this thing can still have a solution where it doesn't have to use every tile, but then this grammar can have a string that it can generate also. So let's see. So what are we going to actually do here? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a different grammar. So I'm going to call this grammar G2. And the language of G2 is going to be the set of similar strings that are different in a certain sense. Oh, I forgot to say, the reason for the reverse here is that we want to be able to generate terminals from the center going out. And the reason for that is how the grammars work. So if it was the other way around, then the grammar, the language of the thing would not necessarily be context-free. So we need to have the reverse right here. You can make the grammar for it, but it turns out it will not correspond to the original set of tiles here because we're generating them going in the reversed bottom parts are going from the other direction, so they have to be reversed. Okay, so it turns out that it's kind of relevant for this part, this grammar too. So the language of this thing is going to be all the strings of the form W $, the pound sign's important, X, where W is not equal to X. And I'm not going to go through the argument, but this thing is context-free. Because what you do, oh, I forgot to say X reversed. X reversed, you need to have X reversed here. Because if you think about what it means to be different, that means they differ in at least one place. So at some bits at the beginning, they may be exactly the same. So let's say that they were the same up to, let's say, the fourth character is different. So then if we look at the resulting string, then if we look at the reverse here, then that would imply that the A are the same, the B's are the same, the C's are the same, and then maybe they are different right here. So maybe there's a D there and an E there. So then these strings would obviously be different. The original string, the non-reversed one, is different because this thing is the same as this when reversed, except in this fourth position. So the first three characters are the same. So we needed to have reverse here because in order to generate these strings, we need to have the ends be the same other than the middle part. So if the strings are different, so they're the same up to the place where they are different, obviously. And if let's say the A was right here, so if it was like W $X, which was not reversed, then this thing would not be context-free. Because this corresponding A would be really far away from this A, and then how would you ensure that they're actually the same? So it turns out to be quite, in fact, impossible for a grammar to actually do that. So we need to have them be at the ends in order for this to work, to be context-free. So you can see that there's kind of a relationship between these two grammars right here. So here we are effectively having the strings right here being this one form on one side and the reverse on the other one, and in the same otherwise. Here we have effectively the same string up until where they are different, but it's reversed on one side. Same up here. So then what are we going to do to make the full grammar? So the full grammar is going to be very simple. I'm going to call it G. So what it's going to do is it's going to have its start variable go to S1, which is the start variable of the first guy, or S2, so which is the start variable of the second guy. One thing that we need to be sure about is, let's see, so what can we do? One thing that we need to be sure about is that these $signs are separating each of these strings. So we need to argue around that. So let's actually think about this. So suppose that the tiles here had a solution that required every single tile. then that solution requires every single tile, which means that it requires every single rule here. Okay, well, this grammar right here is not really corresponding to this one, because this one doesn't have dollar signs. Dollar signs are specific to G1. So what we're going to do is we're going to not have it go to S2 or S1. We're going to modify the first grammar. So how are we going to modify the first grammar? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to use the power of homomorphisms. So homomorphisms are you map certain strings to other strings such that effectively what you can do is each character maps to a string. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a homomorphism. Let's call it H. Homomorphism H. And what it's going to do is it's going to delete the dollar sign characters. So effectively what it's going to do is H of A is going to be equal to A for any A that is not the dollar sign, and H of the dollar sign is equal to empty. Okay? And we know that context-free languages are closed under homomorphism. So if I apply homomorphism to the strings in a context-free language, I still get a context-free language at the end. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply H to the first language. So remember, the first language was the set of all pairings of strings that have a full solution, or a solution, I should say. So if we apply the homomorphism, that will delete the dollar sign characters effectively from this grammar. And so what we're going to show is that, well, if this is not contained in L2, then this will mean that this corresponds to whether the set of tiles has a solution. Okay, so if it's not contained in here, then remember L2 is the set of pairings of strings that are different. So if the strings across from the dollar sign are the same, then that means it's not in L2. So then now what I want to do is I want to construct the inverse homomorphism of this guy. Okay, so effectively what I'm going to do is I'm going to reinsert dollar signs effectively everywhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the inverse homomorphism of L2. And what we know about context-free languages is that they are closed under inverse homomorphism. And that's not that hard to actually show. So this is a context-free language. And one thing that I'm going to not prove here is that the grammar for this, so the grammar for this is minimal. Just for that piece. It's only just for that piece. And for similar reasons, the set of tiles has a solution if and only if the original language L1, not the homomorphism one, is not contained in the inverse homomorphism of L2. So for very similar reasons. It's kind of like having an equation where I'm applying the inverse operation to both sides. If I apply the inverse operation to H here, I'm going to get the original language back, and then I'm applying it over here. So it's effectively like an equation here. So then now the real full grammar I want to use is S2, I'm going to call it -1. So that start variable is going to be for the inverse homomorphism of L2. Okay, so now, and the reason I want to do it this way instead of this way is that I can't really remove those dollar signs without changing the minimality of I need to be able to separate each of the tiles from all the other tiles. Okay, so now I claim that we have proven everything we want to. So let's say that the set of tiles is a solution, or not is a solution, has a solution, has a full solution, I should say. So that means that there is a solution that requires every single tile. So that means that in here, there is a string that requires every single rule of the first grammar. So there exists a set of tiles used. Actually, I should say a sequence. A sequence of tiles used that uses all of them, uses all tiles, which would imply that all rules in the first grammar are used. Okay, so let's see. So here, then that means that we can't, because it's not contained in here, then so then if we consider this second grammar right here, then the words, the strings that don't use the $sign, they are using all of the rules in the second grammar. So any string that doesn't have $sign is going to use all rules in the second grammar. Okay, so because in the first grammar every single rule is used, and so therefore any string that doesn't have a $sign is going to have to be derived in some way, because the second grammar derives all strings that don't have $signs. And so therefore every single rule in G2 has to be used. So in the constructed grammar right here, G, every single rule is used because so all the ones that S1 could ever use are used by the full instance. And the second one, all the strings that don't have $signs have to use those. So that means that this new start variable, for any instance that encodes the inputs to that encode the tile usage, they have to use all of the rules of S1. At least some string uses all of them. And there are some strings that use all of them over here. And so therefore, this grammar really is minimal. So that implies that this grammar G is minimal. Cool. So then now let's suppose that P does not have a full solution. So P does not have a full solution. So then what would that imply? Well, then that means that there is some tile that is not used. So there exists some tile that is not used, right? So then that means in the first grammar, one of the rules can be removed. So in the first grammar, the rule of the form S goes to, let's say, $U, not U, I use T. So TI, actually it was S1. So S1 BI $, for some I can be deleted. Okay, so then that means that the grammar is not minimal. So G is not minimal. And then therefore, we can actually assume more than this. So if it doesn't even have a full solution, then that means that we can actually remove every single rule other than the # one in G1, but that's less of an issue. But this asserts to us that the grammar is not minimal because this particular rule can be removed. It's not rule minimal anymore. Okay, so if it had a full solution, then the grammar that we made is minimal. If it doesn't have a solution, then that means that the grammar is not minimal. So that would imply to us then that min CFG is undecidable. Cool. So a pretty complicated proof involved a lot of steps, but we were able to get through all of it. So hopefully that was interesting. Leave thoughts about minimal CFGs in the comments down below. As always, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. There are many other links in the video description if you want to support the channel further. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.